So I got this article from the Harvard Business Review that talks about 4 traits, characteristics of a great learner. And as I read through them, I found them very fascinating, and I wanted to share those, but add my own little spin to them. And as I go through these 4, I really would suggest you think to yourself, do any of these or all of them apply to you as well? So the first of these 4 is aspiration. Now I'll have to admit that when I saw that one as the first one on their list, I was like a little confused as to how is aspiration a critical attribute or characteristic of a great learner? But as I thought about it, the more I realized that actually is true. Now, any great learner would find value in just simply learning more, learning about a topic, and just almost for the sake of learning, the sake of the knowledge. And so that's certainly something I think any great learner would have. And that's particularly the case if it's around a topic that is just of interest to them. You know, it's not something that they feel pushed on them that they have to learn, or something they have to learn for work that it's like, okay, I just need to learn this thing. It's probably good for me, but I don't really want to. But if it's something that you have a general interest in, that makes it certainly much easier for you to want to learn more, to aspire to learning more about that particular topic. You know, learning is a challenge. It is difficult. And so that difficulty, you know, can certainly prevent people from, you know, going down that road of trying to learn something, particularly if they're starting from, you know, point zero, that they know nothing about this topic. Pursuing that can be a bit of a challenge for people. But great learners will push through that difficulty because they do see the long-term benefit of that knowledge, not just for the knowledge itself, but what value comes out of having that knowledge. One element that I know that a lot of students and skill, you know, that a lot of students have some difficulty with is speaking up in class. You know, they're hesitant to do that because they don't want to look, you know, they don't want to look awkward. They don't want to look stupid in front of their, you know, classmates and their peers. So they don't speak up. This idea of aspiration is driven by the fact that I know, and I want them to know, that there is great value well beyond this class to getting comfortable, to rising to some level of mastery of public speaking, of speaking in front of a bunch of people. Because, you know, whether or not it's going to make you comfortable at a networking event on campus, you know, interviewing, or later on speaking up, you know, in front of colleagues and your boss on the job, that's where the benefit is. That's where someone, you know, who is a great learner aspires to reach that benefit. It's not just for the sake of learning all the time. Most of the time it's about, I want to learn that thing. I want to develop some mastery in that topic and that skill so that when I am on the job, I'm going to feel comfortable speaking in front of others. I'm going to know that topic extremely well. And it's that's the element of aspiration that I think is really critical to someone who is a great learner. The second attribute is self-awareness. Now, when I read that one rang really true to me. What that means is that it's really important for someone to realize that in most things, there's always the ability to learn more. I wouldn't even say in most things, actually. I should change that to say in everything. There's always room to learn more. There's always something else to learn. And that awareness is really critical to being a great learner. So this difference between what we think we know and what we really know, or how much more we can know, is referred to as the Dunning-Kruger effect. As we start to learn about a topic, we start to believe that we have, you know, I don't want to say mastery, but we know a lot about a topic. And so immediately as we start learning, our confidence level about that knowledge, you know, goes up really high. But it's only over time, as one continues to learn about that topic, that they realize, I actually don't know that much about this topic. There's so much more to learn. And it's as you actually learn more about a topic, you start to realize there's so much more to learn about this topic that I don't know yet. That kind of self-awareness of realizing, hey, I really don't know this much is really important, because that drives one who is a great learner to continue to want to learn more and more. an example for me about that is I grew up, in elementary school, middle school, and high school playing the violin. And I thought I was really good until I went and listened to Itzhak Perlman play the violin. And then I realized there's so much more for me to learn about playing this instrument because that guy just like killed it. I thought I knew a lot until I saw a true master. And so that's his point of like, once I knew that there was so much more for me to learn how to play on the violin, that drove me to learn more and more. So it's that self-awareness that is critical for someone to say, I want to put in the time. I want to deal with the difficulties of learning, the challenges of learning, because I realize I don't know that much. The third attribute is curiosity. Now that's definitely one that was on my list as well, because I'm always kind of pushing my students to try to be curious outside of just their natural kind of areas of interest, to take the blinders off, in essence, and kind of look around and find other areas to develop some competency in and to learn more about it, because one never knows, and I've seen this more often than not, one never knows that if you learn something over here in this area, that you can apply it into different categories and, take lessons from different industries, different professions, or, in school, take something that you might have picked up in a gen ed class or just in another, or working with somebody that's in another major, and they bring a different kind of perspective and insight to something. So it's seeing those connections come from just being curious to asking sometimes maybe annoying questions of why. Okay, you want to do it this way, but why do you want to do it that way? Why have we always done it that way? How come? Is there a better way? So that kind of, sometimes it might be seen as kind of a challenging environment, but for me, it's just about being curious, about trying to continue to ask these questions to, again, take the blinders off and start digging into and understanding, why is something happening this way? Why did it happen this way? Kind of an example of this in kind of maybe a funny way is that early on, my wife and I spent some time in Russia, and while we were there, we had a driver and a translator, both who obviously spoke Russian, and we don't speak any Russian, learned a few things. But while we were there, we'd go to some stores, and I noticed how after every time we bought something in a store, the cashier would always rip the receipt in half. And I was like, why are you ripping that? I didn't understand why they were doing that. I asked our translator, why do they do that? We noticed that they always rip the receipt in half. Is there a reason why they do that here? Because they certainly don't do that in the United States. And then the translator and the driver started talking to each other in Russian. And after like maybe 20 or 30 seconds, they just both started laughing so hard. And then the translator turned back to me and said, you're absolutely right, but I have absolutely no idea why we do it. But we do it. That curiosity is asking the question, why are you ripping the receipt in half? Didn't make any sense to me. So I asked that question of why and got back a funny answer. And in honesty, they didn't even have an answer as to why they do that. Now, the same process should happen in your work as well. After you graduate, you got your first job, is to be thinking the same thing, asking those same questions as to why we're doing it that way. How come? I don't understand. Why is this? And as you're doing that, a great learner is also watching, listening, reading to understand something, not to just react, which is something that I think we can all do better at. And that's what a really curious person is trying to do. They're watching what's happening. They're listening to what someone's saying, or a customer is saying, or colleagues are saying, and trying to understand why you're going that way, why you're doing it this way, why that decision. Not to react, but to truly understand so that they can start hopefully making things better. And that natural kind of curiosity, that thirst to understanding something is really critical to being a great learner. The last one is vulnerability. like with aspiration, I was a little caught off guard with that until, again, I thought about it and realized, yeah, absolutely. Vulnerability is important to be a great learner. For nearly, I think, any skill, particularly if you're starting from point zero, you know nothing about it or a topic, it's going to feel uncomfortable for sure. It's going to be awkward to when you start to try to learn something new. It's going to feel a little, kind of maybe embarrassing at times, depending on, what it is. If it's, for me, when I was in college, and then when I was doing my MBA, had to learn and had to take classes in French, and I got pretty good at it over time, but I was always, at the beginning, certainly, I was always really nervous because I didn't want to say something really stupid. I didn't want to have a horrible accent or say it in just a weird way. That's part of learning, though, is having those awkward moments. But again, you need to feel comfortable with that vulnerability. If you're not willing and not kind of willing, somewhat like self-awareness, to kind of admit, hey, listen, I don't know a lot about this topic. I'm prepared to mess up at the beginning until I can get better at it. If you're not willing to do that, if you're not willing to embrace the suck, in the sense that, like, I suck at this, but I'm going to embrace that because I know that this is a temporary thing. It's going to be temporary that I don't understand how to do this. As if I continue to apply myself at this particular skill, if I keep reading about it, keep listening to videos or watching videos or listening to podcasts or whatever it might be, or going to seminars and reading and learning about it, I know over time I'm going to get better at it. And if I know that fact, then I can be vulnerable because I know I'm going to get past this. This is just a temporary situation, but it's difficult for a lot of people to, not necessarily to admit that, to be comfortable with that, to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. But that's really important. So having that sense of vulnerability, kind of knowing as you jump into a new topic, or even if it's an existing topic that quite a lot about already, but there's the next step, the next stage. And that too can be kind of difficult as well as you learn a new skill on top of an existing set of skills, but kind of in the same area. You're going to still have that repeated kind of, vulnerability growing to a certain level of mastery, then some more vulnerability up to another level of mastery. And you're going to continue to go through that cycle for the rest of your life. But if you're comfortable with that, saying like, whatever, I know I'm horrible at this, but I'm going to get better because I'm going to keep pursuing it. But I'm fine with it if I screw up. So these 4 different traits or attributes of great learners are, I believe, really on point. Now, the question, though, is how many do you feel like you have? And then the second question is, are these things skills or aptitudes or approaches that one can actually develop? And the answer to that is yes. And I'll talk about that in another video.